No doubt Father Joe Gillespie needs no introduction. However, I will give a short one, if I may. So Father Joe Gillespie is in the order of...
preachers.
Yes.
Not creatures, but preachers.
The Dominican order, which... Is it any surprise that he is part of the Order of Preachers? Because what an incredible preacher.
Well, thank you.
Graduate of De La Salle High School in Minneapolis, St. John's University in Collegeville, worked for the Catholic Youth Center in Minneapolis before being ordained as a Dominican priest in 1970. Deep roots in Minneapolis, as well as throughout the world. Most recently served as a pastor of the church at St. Albert the Great, but he's also been part of our parish at the Basilica for many, many years, and we're so deeply grateful that he's here. And one of the biggest gifts that Joe brings that I resonate with and just appreciate so deeply is that he shows up. And I mean that deeply, not just that he's here like right on time, but he shows up for our lives, for our pastoral needs. Throughout the Twin Cities, any hospital or hospice center, they know Father Joe. They have his number on speed dial. So I'm honored and grateful, Joe, for your partnership, your leadership, and your willingness. And the talk today is Hope is the Thing with Feathers That Perches in the Soul by Emily Dickinson. And I will stop talking and thank you, Joe.
All right. No, I'm fresh off the boat. Quite literally last night we arrived, well actually the plane from, where were we, in Hungary? Budapest, and coming back from Budapest to Amsterdam and Amsterdam to Minneapolis. But there was always the rumor, in effect, in Europe that the air traffic controllers are not showing up for work and it's on strike and so on. So there was this moment of uncertainty for sure about whether we're going to get back and I could get me to the church on time because quite literally I've had that experience before. And as we know with the wonderful road construction here in Minneapolis that occurs yearly and annually and any day of the week. So it was never clear, even if I were driving for a wedding or a funeral even, to get me to the church on time. So I'm delighted that everything worked out last night and we were able to arrive here this morning, fresh from the roast beef dinner at St. Albert the Great Parish, that you're all invited to after, or this afternoon as well. But Janice, when she was asking for talking about the gift of hope, I think that's really my hidden message, if it isn't too apparent at this point. But we are invited into this experience of hope and to find a way in which to celebrate the gift of it as a community, even amid our differences, whether we see them as political or whether we see them as part of our religious issues as well. We're looking for something that'll bridges us into conversation with one another and to find a way in which we can celebrate. So it's not just the preaching to the choir for those who show up regularly for church, but it really is hopefully inviting us into triggering some kind of permission, you might say, to speak truth to the power, to find a way in which to not shrink from the ability to see what's going on around us, whether it's in the church or within our political situation or in the world in which we live. We're looking for a way simply to speak about reality. It's not an invitation to construct better fake news than somebody else, or to create some kind of Pollyannish view of the universe that always says everything is going to be all right. We could break out into a chorus of Annie, that the sun will come out tomorrow. And I think today would be a good reason for it to come out. It's a little windy and chilly out there as well today. But we can't always have it the way we want it, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean we have to walk away angry about the fact that it's not always going our way. I take great joy in a particular phrase. My father used to use it too. It was one by this French philosopher, Hilaire Belloc, who said, "Wherever the Catholic sun does shine, there's bound to be raucous laughter and good red wine." At least I've always found it so. Benedicamus Domino. For those of us old enough to have survived Latin for all those years, we can give thanks to God. And it's not just because you got good red wine or sunshine, but we can find a way in which to create an understanding of stability within us through the foundation of the invitation to not only recognize our baptisms, but also to find a way in which to experience the gift of like-minded people, but also people who can confront us when there are differences, and to find ways in which to say, well, maybe you've had too much red wine. Maybe you're laughing entirely too much. It's sort of like going through the graveyard and making jokes all the time or something. But we have to be serious enough to know where the bodies are buried and what it is that we might be frightened of having a conversation about. It's interesting, in this trip that I was just on, and I don't know if anybody's here who had been a part of that, but oh yes, there, I think Laura. So she'll be able to tell the truth when I give a different interpretation of it. But when we ended up beginning in Prague, the Czech Republic, we had a wonderful, I want to say younger woman. Everybody's younger than at this point. I think I talked to Ron. Where's Ron? But he was saying he was feeling old today. But most of us are there whether we like it or not. But she was in her 50s, I would imagine. But she was a teenager during the communist period in the Czech Republic, and so she had a great memory of the fear that existed and the control. I mean, absolute when the communists came in, and then it wasn't until 1989 that the Berlin Wall fell, and that all of these communist-held countries, whether it was in the Czech Republic or in Romania or Bulgaria, wherever it happened to be, that they would follow suit as the communists withdrew from the experience. But if we were living under those circumstances, certainly her recollections of it were severe in the sense that everything was under control of one party. And the danger, of course, is always, politically, I guess, that we're a nation of a democratic nation, and we're struggling to try to maintain that sense of conversation, that we do have our differences, but we also have ways of settling them, we hope, by appropriate conversations and voting abilities. So when I think of that whole little poem of Emily Dickinson, it's just very brief. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. It sings the tune without words and never stops at all. It's brief, to the point, and maybe some of us are trying to figure out what does a bird have to do with anything, and how do we know what they are in some way symbolizing. I think for Emily Dickinson, who was the author of over 1,800 poems, 10 of which seem to have been published while she was alive. So those who found her treasure trove of poetry have spent a lifetime trying to catch up on publishing a lot of her wit and wisdom. It wasn't always serious, but she was a woman who could capture not only her New England roots, but also her struggles personally as well. And so I think as we look for ways in which to find the right metaphor to sustain us as we're looking for hope, that's important. I think of my own mother, who before we had a television, some of us, again, are old enough to remember those days, and had one television in the neighborhood over at the Murphy home, and we would go there as children on Thursday nights to see the Lone Ranger, and then reenact it out on the lawn once we went out galloping around. But the difficulty was, as each home got their own television, so we lost the experience of community too. We were all watching the same program, but alone in our own homes. And a number of people, maybe during COVID, began to experience that too with their relationship to church, because they were watching it, albeit probably while still in bed with a cappuccino or something, and some people said, well, why would I want to give that up to come back to trying to find a parking space at the Basilica of St. Mary, or to just fight the possibility of infection or anything like that. So there is a significant part of the Catholic population that has not returned. I think in 1965, the polls that were taken indicated that about 85% of Catholics went to Mass on Sunday. Currently, 2025, it's between probably 28 and 31%, somewhere in there, which is a significant drop, and it doesn't seem to be gaining a lot of strength. I had Mass this morning at St. Albert the Great Parish, and there was a family who I've known for years, and one of their grandsons was in from Chicago with his new wife. And I think the last time I saw him in church, he was maybe about 10 years old here at the Basilica. But it was at his invitation, he called me and he said, Father Joe, I got married and I want our marriage blessed. Can you give us a blessing? And it was interesting that he is not what we would call a church goer, but there was something almost inherent in his need to recognize that this is different than just going to the justice of the peace, that there is something that is generated in the community of faith, whether it is through the sharing of sacraments, or whether it is in the reception of communion, or whether it's just in the experience of being together. That is part of the experience, I think, that that people yearn for and find it. It was interesting on the boat as we were traveling along the Danube River. We had opportunity for masses in different major countries. And so we might be in a 13th century Gothic cathedral, and I'd have the Mass, or we were at the Abbey of the Melk, which is a beautiful Benedictine abbey. The original abbey was dating back to the maybe 8th century, and the later addition and the school that is being run there was from the 1600s. Everything is in that kind of opulent Baroque style. Our cathedral here at Basilica is beautiful in its own way, and will be even more beautiful, I think, at least in terms of the hiddenness of some of the beauty that has been damaged during the years. But it will reflect, in a way, not only a spirit of joy and inviting people into a remarkable space, but through all of these centuries, the churches, even in the communist era, were maintained somehow, even though the ability to be able to go to church was contained and curtailed. But I think also we had Mass on the boat itself, which was interesting. Whether you were floating, really going with the flow with your religious experience, quite literally, on the Danube River, or whether you were in the steady presence of some iconic cathedral from the 13th or 14th century. There was a sense of presence that just came in being together, experiencing the breaking of the bread or the drinking of the cup, the very thing that all of you experienced upstairs in just a short time ago. I think as we look for ways in which we can be a people filled with hope, we have to also get some sense of the psychological drama that occurs in our lives. And there, as one woman said to me after her husband died, she just looked at me with tears in her eyes and she said, "This changes everything." And it's true. It does change everything that you had established, the way in which you thought it would go forever. I think of the poem, sections of that poem by Auden called Religious Blues. And he said, stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, throw a bone to the dog to quiet the barking, somehow bring in the coffin, muffle the drum, let the mourners come. Somehow that invitation to recognize that this person, or maybe a perception of your role, whether it is in a job that you have or a lifestyle that you are leading. But in his poem, he says, the person was my east, my west, my north, my south, my working week, my Sunday rest. We thought it would last forever, but we were wrong. What do you do with that conclusion when you realize that you were wrong or I was wrong, and how we try to maintain or control things? It is with that human dynamic of recognizing the various bombshells that occur within our lives, or maybe within our church, or certain our political environments as well. We're looking for a way in which to try to secure maybe a sense of how do we do damage control? How do we find a way in which to scurry about and look to plug the holes in the ship that's sinking, or whatever the metaphor that we might yearn for. But we are also having to deal with the fact that some things can't be fixed, that they are broken. And it is in that understanding of recognition that we can move then into some kind of level of awakening or acceptance. And I think that occurs at so many different times in our lives, whether it is in the relationship of loss with an individual that might have been sharing our lives for all of these years, or whether it was just in retirement. Some people have said, well, we thought you were retired years ago. And I said, well, not that I know of. I was thinking of an incident, I mentioned it maybe before, of being over at United Hospital at 4:30 in the morning one Saturday morning. And the person I was to see had been transferred from the emergency room up to the 7th floor. And so the nurse on duty said, well, why don't you just go right upstairs, but we'll send a guard with you at this hour of the morning. I wasn't sure exactly what we were to expect getting on the elevator, but I'd done that many times. And so we were about the 3rd floor, and this young guard was there. And he looked at me and he said, "Did they pay you to do this?" I said, "Not enough." And then he said, "Me too." And so by the time we hit the 7th floor, he's talking about, let's start a union. Well, I don't think by the time I finished and got downstairs, they may have caught on to his act and fired him or something. But nonetheless, I don't think we can always demand that everything remain the same. And just being on the boat, it was really the kind of ideal metaphor of how do you go with the flow? How do you literally just keep moving? There was a great pre-Socratic philosopher by the name of Heraclitus. Not that you would need to rush out and try to find his work. There isn't any. A few fragments. But one of the fragments that they found attributed to him is that you can never step in the same river twice. And I've always kind of held that in the background. It's like some things you just want to hang on to, but you know they're just kind of like water moving through your fingers, and you say, okay, well, maybe I could just appreciate the refreshment of this experience of having entered into the relationship with this person or with the event itself. So many of us end up being grudge bearers, you know, because it's not our way. I think of the woman who used to live across the street from us, Mrs. McGowan, who was the scourge of all of us who played street football, because she would call the police and say they're at it again. The hooligans are out in the street breaking the rules. So the Minneapolis police would arrive and say, okay, when we leave, you can go back and play, you know. But so Mrs. McGuire was never quite satisfied. So she would come over and sit on the porch with my mother, who was the epitome of forgiveness and kindness and joy. She just was a happy person. And I remember sitting there one day when they were having tea, and Mrs. McGuire said to my mother, "Mary, you must learn to forgive." And my mother was just patiently waiting for her, and maybe thinking, maybe I shouldn't forgive this woman now. But anyway, when she said, "Mary, you must learn to forgive. But," she said, "you never forget what you forgave." And I thought, what a wonderful way to go through life. You're just always bearing the grudge, or always carrying this kind of antagonism about things. You can't let go of anything. And so I think going with the flow is not to surrender easily so much, but to be able to say, yeah, this too shall pass, or this. All you have to do is take a walk through the St. Mary's Cemetery or Lakewood Cemetery or whatever it happens to be. And we saw that in these beautiful cathedrals too, that became in some ways metaphors for our experience of life. How do you appreciate the beauty, even the extreme beauty of, a Rococo, where you had more gold than you find in the White House now. We didn't want to alert them that there was more gold in these churches. You know, they might be able to rescue a bit of it and bring it back. But I think finding a way in which to look at a recognition of how we come to a level of acceptance and then move on becomes part of the psychological drama of our lives. Some of us are maybe better at it. Maybe some may appear a little more cavalier about it and just saying, well, that's the way it is. You just chalk up your losses and move on. But I think it is that search for truth that tries to create a sense of immutability too, that we cannot afford to be relative about the truth. We need to be able to find a sense of stability within it. Now, when we look at the whole virtue of hope, when Paul talks about it in Corinthians, he said the greatest of faith, hope, and charity, the greatest is charity or love. But to get to that point of being able to love consistently, you do need faith, and you need a lot of hope as well. In the first letter of St. Peter, I think it's chapter 3 or whatever, he uses this wonderful little phrase that he said as believers, you must be willing to give a reason for the hope that is within you. That you need to be able to recognize at the heart of hope is always faith. You can't really have hope without faith. Faith gives you the power to be able to enter into an endurance contest and to see beyond the eyes of fear and look through the eyes of faith. Now, that isn't always an easy thing to be able to construct. And whether we're looking for the Shangri-La or we're looking for paradise or heaven, I think of a wonderful snippet from one of Maya Angelou's poems in which he says, I would think a place pure paradise where families are loyal, strangers are nice, the season is fall, the music is jazz. Promise me that, or nothing at all. Well, maybe for card-carrying Catholics, we'd want to say, no, where are the little angels and where are the harps? And, well, most of us have graduated beyond that kind of fantasy world. We're looking for an experience in which we might understand better through the eyes of Zen Buddhism that we are involved in becoming united with God. It's not just a lot of floating bodies here and there, but it really is an invitation of unity with the gift of God. That is really what the beatific vision really is all about, is to be able to see with eyes of faith rather than eyes of fear. I think as we read also some of the poets, I was thinking of Carl Sandburg, great Midwestern poet, and I think of his little poem entitled Fog, which I've used on occasion, simply because it seems to capture the reality of hope for me. Fog is what comes in on little cat feet and sits overlooking harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. It is that understanding, the cat coming in, sitting on those silent haunches overlooking the city and harbor, and then moves on. Part of us might panic that we don't think the fog is ever going to lift, and that becomes the difficult moment as we get stuck in the middle of our fear. I had the privilege when I started out in ministry 100 years ago now. Actually, it was in 1968 as a deacon. I was working in a clinical pastoral program in Chicago and arrived there in early April, just in time for Martin Luther King's assassination in Memphis, Tennessee. But I remember suddenly the entire west side, not entire west side, but certainly near west side and the south side were on fire. I mean, the riots that were occurring at that time. And all summer long, we were, of course, with Bobby Kennedy's assassination and with the Democratic Convention that was occurring there and the Chicago 7 in Grant Park. And there I am. I was awarded the job of being the chaplain to the morgue, which some people thought was appropriate, that it would be quieter for me, that I wouldn't have much to worry about there. But it turned out to be one of the most kind of impressive and active, engaging ministerially, because I had to be present, not with everyone, but so many people who came in to identify the reality of loss in their life. The vision of this young man who drowned in the river and the parents coming, and others victim of fires and murder and so on. It opened my eyes to a way in which, whether I liked it or not, I had to be present to the horrors that surrounded us. And then to walk out of Cook County Hospital and see the police and fire trucks moving around and so on. It was, I think, quite literally a baptism of fire for me to enter into the experience of ministry, not because I wanted to hold it up as the hallmark for what we should all be opening ourselves to. I mean, if I probably were honest, I would say I'd rather be somewhere else, maybe even on a riverboat cruising down the river. But it is that invitation of recognizing how we can create a sense of hope in the midst of the tragedies that unfold, whether we like them or not, and to find a way in which to be able to say yes to these invitation, as Janice said, to show up. I can't claim that as the reality that always is easy to do, as most of you who maybe have had children and who wants to get up at 2:30 and change the diaper or get the bottle out again or do this or do that. But there is that invitation to somehow be recognized as a willingness to say yes. Somebody asked me, they said, well, what is your philosophy of ministry? And I said, yes. And they said, no, what is your philosophy of ministry? And I said, yes. That's what my philosophy of ministry is. Once you start saying no, it isn't to say that there aren't limits, that you can't take the day off, or you can't actually, as somebody said, I wouldn't mind a job like yours, just cruising down the river. I said, well, I don't do that all the time, but even though they're living close to the Mississippi most of my life, it always became a metaphor for recognizing that you have to go with the flow. But if you're always saying no, you keep insisting that the flow shouldn't be happening, that you shouldn't in some way be dragged out of your, to some extent, level of innocence or denial. When I was in Chicago in that year, in that summer of '68, I had the remarkable pleasure of meeting Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was at another hospital, but since we were all students at that time, we were participating in her studies on figuring out the stages of how people respond to death. And it was interesting meeting her. She was just a kind of a wispy little person, not sort of my experience meeting Mother Teresa too, these two smaller women who were just dynamos of engagement and compassion. I think that was the most interesting thing. You could have the surgeons, wandering around with their stethoscopes and their white coats, and it isn't to say that surgeons were the only one, but there was a certain level of perceived importance, and rather than just the kind of smaller people who were around. As one person said, the difference between a surgeon and God is that God doesn't think he's a surgeon. That might be said for priests, too. Jesus would never want to be associated with priests. And there are a lot of wonderful little incidences in the gospel, not only the Good Samaritan story, but so many other incidences that in a way people can hide behind the invitation to get involved. And certainly being a part of the Basilica when I came up here in 1998 was really, I was only going to be here for a semester. I was on sabbatical from St. Louis University. And I don't know, 8 years later I was still here. As Michael O'Connell used to say, I don't know how God spoke to you, but I'm glad he did. He said, I tried to get it across that we would like you to stay here. And I kept saying, no, I have to go back. I'm under contract to teach. And what echoed in my mind when I would have those conversations with Michael was when I met Mother Teresa in 1994 in Calcutta, and at the end of this wonderful conversation, just the two of us, tea for two, quite literally, that's who we were, and she had 2 lumps of sugar, by the way. And when I was doing my best interviewing skills because I thought that's what I should do. And she kind of went like this and said, time out, I want to talk to you. And I want you to talk to me about what you think is important in life. You can read about me, she said. They all exaggerate everything that I do. But she said, I want to talk to you. But what echoed in my mind, and certainly was a part of the experience here initially at the Basilica of St. Mary, was with Mother Teresa saying, I would like you to come and work here. And I thought, I don't want to be in Calcutta. I understood when the metaphor was used, the hellhole of Calcutta. If you've been there at the time, at that time it was pretty dangerous. And I said, Mother Teresa, I'm under contract, I have to go. And she said, no, I understand. She said, but I just want you to promise me one thing. And I said, what's that? And she said, wherever you go, you must find your own Calcutta. I hear that regularly, that it's in the background of my DNA now. So when I get the call, as I did when we were, we were in Vienna, I had a call about 1:30 in the morning, and it was from Hennepin County Hospital here. She didn't know that I was traveling or whatever. And I remember talking to the chaplain, and I called back, and he said, can you come down? And I said, well, I would like to, but I'm in Vienna. He said, where? I said, no, in Europe. He said, oh, I'm sorry, and I said, well, it's too late to go back to sleep, but on the other hand, if I could, I would. And maybe that's the kind of experience here that is reflective of hope, that if I could, I would. And maybe that is really what my experience of ministry is about, but it may also be my experience of what hope is about, too, that we can create a bridge for one another by showing up. If we can't show up, then can we be of some level of assistance that allows us to invite others into that experience? Maybe as we continue and settle down now, as we end our time together this morning, just with the understanding of each of us being taken up the challenge that St. Peter talks about in his epistle, can we give reason for the hope that is within us? And I think that becomes the ongoing invitation to recognize that wherever the Catholic sun does shine, there's bound to be raucous laughter and good red wine. At least I've always found it so. Benedicamus Domino. Amen.